My girlfriend's really cool though. We like to go to the movies a lot. I'm really into horror movies. One of my favorite horror movies is Poltergeist, but it's a very confusing movie to me. The premise of the movie, spoiler alert on the 30-year-old movie, but the premise is it's about a house that's haunted because it's built on an Indian burial ground, which doesn't make any sense to me because none of the ghosts are Indian. If it was me, I would want to buy a haunted house that's built on a Mexican burial ground because then the lawn would take care of itself. Yeah, some of you groaned, but when I said shit about Indians, no one cared. One of the only offensive joke I've ever told where no one's groaned once, ever. They did a remake of Poltergeist. I don't know if any of you saw it. I didn't see it, but I always worry with remakes of horror movies because they like to take movies that were set like in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. They try to make them more modern, and I think that ruins the movie a little bit. They're talking about doing a remake of The Exorcist, and I think if they do like a more modern take on it, I think it would ruin the movie. Like, could you imagine if that little girl had a cell phone? And she'd be pulling it out and putting it in front of her and taking a selfie of the back of her head. Or her friends would be getting like notifications on like Facebook, like looking like Reagan McNeil just changed her status to "Your mother sucks cocks in hell." Feeling lonely. Her mom would be on WebMD all the time. And when you're on WebMD, it always ends up being the worst thing. Like, well, she's levitating off of her bed and she's masturbating with a crucifix, so it's probably cancer. I think the hardest part about making a modern remake of The Exorcist is that I don't think any parents would trust their kids with Catholic priests anymore. And those guys were slick too. They were like, we're going to strap your daughter to her bed, and no matter what you hear, you can't come in. That shit might fly in the 70s, but it's not going to work now. The worst horror movie franchise ever is the Paranormal Activity series. Have any of you seen it? They're terrible movies made by terrible people. And the premise of the movie is that there are these white people who are afraid of shit falling down in their house in the middle of the night. If you haven't seen any of the movies, I'll demonstrate all of them to you right now. And that's it. They made 6 fucking movies on that. And people like to argue with me too. They're like, no, man, that type of stuff, terrorizing your house in the middle of the night, knocking everything over, that's terrifying. And I'm like, really? Have you ever lived with a cat? Are you guys voting at all? You guys voting? Who are you voting for? Trump? Yeah. That's cool. I'm not really a political comic, which is such a shame because it's such a comedy goldmine right now. But I've been, especially the Republican debates. I haven't watched any of them lately, but I was watching the ones a couple months ago, and I watched the poor Jeb Bush. They really lay into him in those debates. Like, I thought that they were going to drop pig's blood on him, and he was going to kill everyone with his telekinesis. And Ted Cruz, so precious. So Ted Cruz, I don't know if you guys saw this article. There was an article about Ted Cruz, how people were saying that he was the Zodiac killer. Which is funny to me because, like, I don't even think the most sociopathic serial killer could harm as many people as politicians could. Like, these guys vote to take away like Medicare and like fuck over the veterans and then some guy strangles 4 people in the park, and then they want to dissect his brain and figure out what makes him so fucked up. I know it's not really funny, but sometimes you got to just come up here and just talk about how fucked up everything is. I just need you all to be aware. I think we could use a serial killer as a president, though. And if I had the power to, I think the best option would probably have been Jeffrey Dahmer. He probably would have had a lot of great plans. I'm sure he would have fed the homeless. I don't, I don't know who he would have fed them to, but that shit would have gotten done. I feel like I've learned a lot tonight about parenting. You know, a lot of comics talk about parenting, primarily beating their kids, which is all tickles me. Um, a lot of people think it's really weird because I always tell people, you know, they'll talk to me about like how my sister and I were raised, and I'll tell them, I'm like, yeah, you know, we never got hit. We didn't get hit as kids. We didn't get spanked, any of that stuff. And a lot of people think that's really weird. And I'll tell them, I said, well, this is the thing though. What my parents did is they decided to wait until we were grown up and then beat the shit out of us. And you think like, oh, when you're 3, because the difference is that when you're 3 years old and your parent like hits you a little bit, like they're not practicing that shit. They're not like, you know, bulking up and waiting until you're old enough so they can really lay into you. You know, walk out of my room and it's like, hey, Brian, you remember the juice you spilt on the carpet, you know, 23 years ago? So I mentioned my girlfriend earlier. We actually met through online dating, and I really think online dating is really great. I think a lot of the websites are really great, but the only one that I think is really stupid is farmersonly.com. But I consider myself very good at marketing, very good at advertisement, because the jingle is very catchy. Is you don't have to be lonely at farmersonly.com. It's very catchy. But I think that I have a new idea for a slogan, and tell me what you guys think. It's farmersonly.com. Are you tired of the dirt being the only thing that you're plowing?